Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone, where we help you get to the heart of important topics. Today, we're tackling something really relevant, essential skills you need to really succeed in this digital age. We've got three sources to look at today, all about cultural awareness, how to be good at small talk, and what the job market looks like now.
And it might seem like a random mix of topics, but they're actually all super connected. Like
Yeah.
they're all about communicating well, building relationships, and adapting to a world that just keeps changing.
Exactly. And we're going to start with cultural awareness, in this globalized world. I mean, we're all interacting with people from like tons of different backgrounds now, right? Sometimes virtually, sometimes in person. It's exciting, but it can also be tricky if we're not prepared. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And one of the biggest things to keep in mind is that like every organization, every culture has its own like personality and its own way of doing things. And
Mhm.
it's not just about like knowing what to wear or how to greet someone. It's about understanding like the deeper cultural things that affect how people talk and interact, especially at work.
So it's not just about memorizing a list of do's and don'ts.
Right, exactly.
We need to like really do our homework, like the lesson said.
Yeah.
But where do we even start?
Well, I mean, there's some really good resources out there, like Hofstede's Cultural Dimensions. They give you a framework for understanding different cultures based on things like power distance, um, individualism versus collectivism, and uncertainty avoidance. You can even find online tools that compare different countries, and give you an idea of their cultural profile.
That's helpful. It's like a cheat sheet,
Right.
before you go to a new place.
Exactly. And remember, it's not about like becoming an expert on every single culture out there.
Yeah.
It's more about just being aware that there are differences
Yeah.
and approaching every interaction, with curiosity and respect.
Right. And speaking of curiosity, the lesson also said we have to keep our eyes open and pay attention to like nonverbal cues.
Yeah.
I can definitely relate to feeling overwhelmed in a new place when I'm not sure what's going on. Like, I remember this one time I was at a conference in John.
Yeah. Observing those small cues can be super valuable.
Hmm.
Like a simple gesture or facial expression can mean something totally different in a different culture. And misunderstanding that can lead to like, people misunderstanding each other or even getting offended. Like for instance, a thumbs up can be positive here, but in some other cultures it's considered rude.
Yeah. It's amazing how much we're communicating without even realizing it.
Right.
And talking about things that can get lost in translation, the lesson talks about the idea of time too. What's
Mhm.
considered on time in one place can be totally different somewhere else.
Oh, absolutely. Being 5 minutes late for a meeting might be fine in one culture, but in another, it could be like super disrespectful.
Yeah.
And deadlines. Well, in some places, they're more like guidelines than actual rules. Understanding those different ways that people see time can be like really important when you're working with people from different cultures.
That makes sense. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about understanding different perspectives and changing your expectations, right?
Exactly. And it's, important to remember that culture isn't a single thing. Just because someone's from a certain culture doesn't mean they fit every stereotype.
Right.
We always have to be aware of individual differences and not make assumptions.
It's like that saying, to assume makes an ass out of you and me, or something like that. But seriously, it's important to treat everyone as an individual and go into each interaction with an open mind, right?
Right. And that brings us to another important thing from the lesson, the idea of dealing with uncertainty. For people who like structure and, predictability, this can be tough. But in many cultures, ambiguity is just a normal part of life.
Some people just need everything spelled out, black and white.
Right.
But I guess in other cultures, it's more about like reading between the lines and being okay with not knowing all the answers right away.
Exactly. And that can be really frustrating for people who like things to be direct and precise. But learning to work with those differences and be okay with a little bit of uncertainty, that can be a valuable skill in our personal lives and at work too.
It's like learning to dance with the unknown instead of trying to control everything.
Yeah, I like that. And really, that's what cultural awareness is all about.
Hmm.
Developing the skills and the mindset to navigate a world with lots of different perspectives, communicate well across cultures, and build relationships that are, actually strong. And this focus on communication, it ties in perfectly with our next topic, the surprisingly complex world of small talk.
Yeah, I think we could all use some help with that. But before we get into that, I want to pause and ask you, our listener, a question. What are some of the biggest cultural differences you've experienced in your own life, and how did you, deal with those situations?
All right, so small talk. I gotta say, I used to hate small talk. It just felt, I don't know, so fake and pointless.
Yeah, I get that. It seems like just like awkward chit chat to a lot of people, but actually small talk has a really important purpose. It's how you start building any kind of relationship.
Well, it's not just like making polite conversation. No, not at all. It's like the foundation for building, like rapport, trust. It's how we find things we have in common and start connecting with someone. Could be a coworker, a client, even just someone you meet at a party.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But still, those first conversations can be so, I don't know, awkward.
Oh, they can be, for sure. But the good news is that small talk is a skill. You can learn it and get better at it with practice. And one of the key things from the lesson is that it's really important to listen actively. It's not just about talking. It's about really paying attention to what the other person's saying,
Yeah.
asking follow-up questions, showing that you're actually interested.
So it's more about being interested than being like the interesting one.
Exactly. People can tell if you're just, waiting for your turn to talk.
Mm.
When you listen actively, you make the other person feel like they're heard and that what they're saying matters. That makes the whole thing so much better.
That makes sense. What about when you're like struggling to find things to talk about? Are there any topics that always work?
Well, the lesson gave a few of the classics like the weather, local events. You could even just ask about someone's weekend, stuff like that. These are pretty safe topics that most people can relate to.
Right, right. And that can lead to more interesting conversations. You could start talking about a local event and realize you both love like live music or a certain sport, something like that.
Exactly. And here's another tip from the lesson. Ask open-ended questions. Instead of saying, "Did you have a good weekend?"
Mm.
You could say, "What did you get up to this weekend?"
Mm.
It's a simple change, but it gets people talking more.
That's a great tip. Takes the pressure off of you to be like the entertainer and lets the other person, take the lead. What about stuff we should avoid talking about?
Yeah, well, the lesson said it's usually good to stay away from anything that can be controversial, like politics, religion, or money, especially at work.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Those are conversation landmines.
Definitely. And it's not just the topic itself, it's also your tone and body language. Even a comment that seems harmless could be taken the wrong way if it sounds, judgmental or dismissive.
So you got to be aware of those subtle cues and make sure like what you're doing matches what you're saying.
Exactly. This brings us to a cool example from the lesson, a conversation between two coworkers, Jason and Ben, just chatting at the office.
Yeah, I remember that. It seemed like a pretty natural conversation. What did they do well?
Well, they kept the topic safe, like work and promotions, job titles.
Yeah.
And notice how Jason asks open-ended questions like, how are things going? And what are you working on these days? That lets Ben share more about himself.
Right. It feels more like a real conversation, not like an interview.
Exactly. And their body language, they're smiling, making eye contact, leaning in a little. All those things show they're interested and engaged.
It's like they're saying, we're here, we're listening, and we care about what you have to say.
Exactly. And that's powerful, even if it's just a quick small talk interaction.
It is. We could all learn from Jason and Ben.
For sure. Small talk takes practice, but the more we understand how to communicate effectively, the better we'll be at making those connections that make our personal and professional lives better.
And speaking of making our lives better, our last topic today is about the future of jobs in this digital age. But before we move on, what are some of your go-to small talk topics? So, jobs in the digital age is kind of exciting and kind of scary at the same time, right?
Yeah, for sure.
On the one hand, there's all this like amazing tech stuff happening, but then you wonder how it's going to affect like our jobs.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. The digital age is like changing the whole job market in ways we've never seen before. It's normal to be unsure about the future.
Totally. We hear all these buzzwords like automation and artificial intelligence all the time, but what do they actually mean? Like for regular people, are robots really going to take our jobs?
A lot of people are asking that. And it's true. Some jobs are being automated, but it's not all doom and gloom. This digital age is also making like whole new industries and jobs that didn't exist a few years ago.
So it's not that jobs are going away, it's that they're changing.
Exactly. The important thing is to understand how this technology is affecting different industries and then like adapt our skills. The lesson mentioned digital disruptors, these companies that are using technology to totally change how we do things.
Oh, yeah. And the examples were Uber and Netflix. Those make sense. They like totally revolutionized their industries. But what are some other examples that might be like closer to home for our listeners?
Okay, well, look at healthcare. The rise of telemedicine and AI-powered diagnostics, it's totally changing how we get and receive medical care. And in manufacturing, robots and 3D printing are changing how things are designed and made.
So it's happening everywhere, not just in like tech industries.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's so important to pay attention to these changes and think about how they might affect our own careers.
Yeah.
Even if your job isn't going to be replaced by a robot, technology is probably going to change how you do your work in some way.
So what can we do to stay ahead of the game? The lesson talked about some specific skills that are like becoming super valuable in this digital age.
Right, right. They highlighted strong IT skills, being adaptable, and being committed to lifelong learning. Basically, just having a degree isn't enough anymore. You need to be constantly learning new things, new technologies, and be open to change. It's about, having a growth mindset, not being afraid to try new things.
So it's not just about what you already know, but how you learn, and adapt to new information and tech.
Exactly. And that's where the whole lifelong learning thing comes in. It's not just formal education. It's about being curious, always looking for new information, and developing those skills that you can use in different jobs and industries.
And for people who are like just starting their careers, what advice would you give them? I mean, trying to figure out this job market that's always changing.
I'd say focus on those core skills we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Communication, critical thinking, problem solving, being adaptable. These are things you can use in any industry, and they'll be valuable no matter what happens, with the job market.
That's good advice. So it's not about choosing the perfect career. It's about having like the skills and the mindset to succeed anywhere.
Exactly. This digital age, it's both challenging and full of opportunity.
Yeah.
By having that growth mindset, staying curious and being willing to adapt, we can navigate this new world and have fulfilling, successful careers.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the essential skills you need to thrive in the digital age. We covered cultural awareness, the art of small talk, and how the job market's evolving.
And I think the main takeaway is that all these things are connected. In this globalized digital world, being able to communicate well, build relationships, adapt to change, and never stop learning, those are more important than ever.
It's been a great conversation. We hope you got some valuable insights and practical tips out of this deep dive, so you can navigate this digital age feeling confident and excited. And remember, the future isn't just something that happens, it's something we create. So go out there, embrace the challenges, grab the opportunities, and keep diving deep.